Good day, and thank you for joining our webinar, Process Intelligence, Your Fuel for Digital Transformation Efforts, presented by Process Fusion in partnership with TimelinePI. Quickly, let's go over some housekeeping items. So you may access the audio portion of the webinar through your computer speakers, or you can dial in by phone. All attendees will be on mute upon joining and for the duration of the webinar. A copy of this presentation is currently available in the Handouts section as a PDF. Also, please feel free to submit your questions in the Q&A panel at any time during the presentation. We will reserve 10 minutes at the end of the presentation to answer as many questions as time permits. And finally, you will receive a recording of today's webinar in a follow-up email. Without further delay, I'd like to introduce you to our speakers. Brooke Martin is the National Healthcare Lead for Process Fusion. Brooke has been in the enterprise content management business for 18 years. Brooke knows no single approach should be used to determine a choice of technology and business outcomes. Brooke's commercial experience spans a diverse set of industries such as healthcare, insurance, logistics, and retail. Brooke's favorite quote is, "Essentialism is not about how to get more things done, it's about how to get the right things done." Scott Opitz is a 30-year veteran of the computer industry and has founded and built companies in the application integration, business process management, and business intelligence spaces. In 2014, he founded TimelinePI and serves as its president and CEO. Alex Steibler has spent the last 10+ years occupying many different roles within enterprise software, and most recently in focusing on data analysis and process intelligence. Now, I'll turn things over to our first presenter, Brooke Martin.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you, and thank you, Monique. I just wanted to start the conversation today on a slide that I find humorous, but I think it doesn't matter whether you're dealing with a paper process or a system process. Everybody seems a little bit overwhelmed, and just the sheer volume of transactions lead to challenges in managing those processes and seeing complete visibility. So I just wanted to start off a little bit of humor. And recently I read a book called Essentialism, and it's where that quote came from by Greg McEwen. And the thing that struck me most about his book was how it relates to workflows, processes, and interactions between people and systems, is that we still struggle as humans and try to do things our own way, even though we have a predictable manner that's been delegated to us in a paper process or even a system in place where we may put data and transact through that. And I think in some systems, how you get to transact that data can be vary by person to person. So if you think about how a process starts, whether it's in paper or comes in by fax or email and gets into your system, I think those are the challenges I want to talk to you today about. And always with paper, I think you're spending energy in multiple different directions, and it's problematic. With a workflow tool or a system tool, usually the energy, excuse me, is much more straightforward, predictable, but that doesn't mean that there are tasks and outcomes within that workflow tool or system that are being done properly and visible to you. So one of the things I've learned in lean healthcare, which applies to any industry, is that there are a number of value-added activities that don't relate to providing value to your customers, whether that be a patient or a direct customer in any manner. And there's really three non-value-added activities in any system or company. They're called waste, variation, and inflexibility. And in waste, there's really 8 types of waste. It doesn't matter what industry you're in. There's scraps and defects, overproduction, motion, waiting time, inventory, transportation and over processing. As you can think about our discussion today about accessing intelligence into a process, these are all pieces that will stand out once you have a tool set to be able to look into it, find these wastes, and act upon them. The second waste is called variation, and this is the problem that causes problems for everybody, is that inconsistent processes equal inconsistent results. And if you're working in paper, you probably have a pretty inconsistent result from time to time. And if you have a workflow tool or a system tool, you have probably greater consistency, but in any case, you still lack visibility to all these pieces that you transact against, especially if there's multiple systems. In a business process automation or BPM, you may be spanning 2 or 3 systems. It's even more so in healthcare these days, where there might be 3 or 4 systems from the time the patient enters the organization and enters out. And the third one is called inflexibility. And the easiest one is to talk about is you have a set of flow of transactions in your organization. They're not always very straight and linear. They come and go in ebbs. And you have probably an inflexible mandate to keep staffing either low or you just can't hire anybody. And then thus you have these deltas between the amount of work to do and the amount of staff you have to do it. And I think that inflexibility in staffing creates huge problems when you get into transactions, and this is where the errors and waste come into it. And I think today's conversation you'll find very informative. This is a great opportunity to look at what you're doing in your organization, and I turn it over to Scott. Thank you for your time.
Thanks, Brooke, and good morning, everybody. What I want to talk to you today is a new technology, relatively new in the last year, that TimelinePI has brought forth to help with the science of process intelligence, and we see this as being, a very key element in successful digital transformation efforts. So if we dive into this, you pretty much today, you'd have to be blind, deaf, and probably even have to live in a cave not to be bombarded with all the noise around digital transformation. Much of this noise today focuses on how, we need to provide greater access for our customers, to interact with us using their favorite technologies. And this is extremely important. This is something that we must do to be able to, really provide the flexibility that the market demands. But the side effect of this is that it's gotten so much attention that it's gotten us into what we call kind of almost like a check-the-box mentality. And you can kind of imagine our checklist, right? Having a highly interactive website, check. Implementing a great IVR technology, check. Do I have an iPhone app? Do I have an Android app? And so on. And, the reasons for this, I think, are pretty clear, right? Over the last couple of decades, each new customer generation has proven to be dramatically more tech savvy than the prior. And, since most of these folks have matured in, what we would call the internet age, they consider it normal operating procedure to be able to abandon a disappointing service, frankly, with a single click of the mouse or a swipe of the finger. And so the the stickiness that we have been accustomed to, going back a little further, associated with the switching costs that would normally prevent somebody from, quickly moving from one vendor or one service provider to another, those switching costs have been greatly reduced. So while enabling these multi-access options, is extremely important, we do need to understand, though, that it's only a very narrow slice of this digital transformation pie. In fact, most analysts that you listen to today would actually agree that failing to go beyond just providing, better access, more ways of communication, and not addressing, the underlying activities of an organization will actually continue to allow companies to fall behind their competition and remain vulnerable. So we believe to gain true transformation, we need to look beyond the relatively simple public-facing interfaces, and we need to aggressively pursue process improvements where possible, and even automate those processes where we're able to do so. This includes not only public-facing processes that might be directly associated with those access methods, but also our internal processes that support all of this activity. Now, the simple truth is, if we only provide the better means of access for our customers and partners without improving those processes, there might actually be a very ugly unintended consequence, which is we may be enabling those parties to frankly more rapidly determine, in fact, how poor the underlying processes really are. At TimelinePI, we believe for an organization to realize its full potential, it must be able to understand, analyze, and optimize those processes. Now, supporting these processes, we think, really needs to be, invisible. It has to be something that works automatically behind the scenes. To illustrate this point, I mean, think about a simple scenario, right? When we're in a car accident, do we really care why some internal issue at our insurance company is causing us to be on hold too long at probably one of the more stressful times in our life, right? Or do we really care that, some problem they're having is the reason I have to repeat myself when I'm transferred from one person to the next and they don't relay the information automatically? Or to have to interact with multiple people for what to me seems like a relatively simple task that you would think should be able to be accomplished by a single interaction in a single step. And frankly, regardless of the industry, I think we'd all agree that providing a mobile app it is not going to overcome these types of limitations. I'm sure we can all come up with a number of personal examples of where we've experienced this type of disappointment. I mean, anybody who's applied for a mortgage or credit application or has to, transfer retirement accounts or perhaps deal with a complex health insurance claim, has had a good chance of being able to see lots of opportunity for improvement in a number of those types of organizations. But again, let's face it, customers don't care about our internal challenges. They just expect it to work properly. And unfortunately, they remember very well where that experience deviates from this expectation. So even if they get their final issue resolved, right, even if they get the resolution to whatever reason they were calling or interacting with us in the first place, the bottom line is the journey of how they get there really matters. Let's also keep in mind, this isn't just about customer interactions. It's also about the people in our organization and how they deal with what they need to do every day. We also need to be willing to assess the effectiveness of all of our processes and differentiate between process issues and people issues. And the only way that we can deal with that is to actually look at a different kind of journey, which is how each of our resources actually go through the steps that they need to go to affect the work they do in their internal processes. So in both of these examples, I think you can see it's only by really understanding the business process that underlie all the things that we do in our operation that we can really identify the opportunities for improvement. And candidly, that's precisely what TimelinePI is all about, giving you that understanding in a new way. Now, what I'd like to do is I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Alex Deibler. And Alex is going to take you through a quick overview of how the product works and then actually give you a demonstration to show it in action. So Alex, over to you.
All right, thanks Scott. Good morning everybody. I've just got a couple of quick slides to go through which are going to introduce kind of the high-level concepts we're going to see as a part of today's demonstration of TimelinePI. So we'll start by going through the three key pillars we'll be touching on during the demonstration. And this is going to start with process discovery. Scott mentioned it, understanding our as-is state. Right now, this may seem trivial, but this portion of the exercise should not be underestimated because in my experience, Many organizations, if they're being honest with you, will admit that they really don't have a great feel for how their processes are being executed from a cradle-to-grave perspective. Okay. Now, once we have that current state knowledge, we understand what our current as-is process is, we'll move on to the analysis phase. This is where we'll start to ask questions of the data by using a variety of powerful applications that are designed specifically to help us uncover inefficiencies in our business, right? Along with the root cause and also possible risk to our bottom line or our business in general. Now, finally, once we've taken that knowledge we've uncovered with the analysis, and we've implemented change policies to mitigate that risk or inefficiency, we want to make sure that we're consistently monitoring and alerting those interested parties to ensure that these new standards that we put in place are being followed. So I'll just give you a high level as to each one of these. After we've successfully uploaded data into the tool, the first logical step is to better understand the current state of our business, right? To Scott's earlier point, you simply cannot improve that which you don't currently understand, okay? Now, we can do that in a number of ways, and oftentimes we'll begin with our timeline or our case analysis. And so you can think of this case analysis as a very detailed, step-by-step look at each and every instance of your business process, whatever that may be. Now, this level of detail allows us to spot inefficiencies, compliance risks at a very, very granular, single case-by-case level. Right? Now, having each process instance's timeline presented to us in an easy-to-digest manner will really provide the building blocks for all the more complex forms of analysis that we'll be touching on. Right? But at its basis, we can get very granular with our analysis. Now, from that micro view of our process, we'll zoom out a bit and start to understand what's the dominant path through our workflow. And we can use schema analysis to do that. Now, one of the keys here is that there are no interviews, no questionnaires, nobody walking around with a stopwatch and a clipboard, right? I don't want to ask how different people believe their part of the process is being executed. We'll simply let the data show what our most common milestone events are and point out where bottlenecks may be occurring within that model. Now, since we're not limiting ourselves to what you may consider a happy path or an expected workflow, we can show you exactly how each and every process instance was executed using execution or swim lane analysis. And this will include interesting statistics and the ability to dig deeper into those inefficiencies or risks. Now, once we have that understanding, right, we'll move on to the analysis phase. Here we'll use things like process query or search, time interval analysis, protocols, root cause breakdowns, and more, which will allow us to ask questions of the data, do quick and powerful hypothesis testing. If we have a feeling there may be a certain scenario that's less than ideal occurring within our process, we can quickly and easily build out graphical queries to either prove or disprove those hypotheses. Right, and then act accordingly. We've also got some other specialized forms of analyzing data like workflow analysis, which is more geared towards managing large call center operations or really any type of queue-based workflow. And this allows us to track that customer interaction throughout their entire journey, regardless of how many different queues or stovepipes they're sent into. And then finally, I mentioned it earlier, but once we have that a better understanding, we uncovered the efficiencies, we take steps to mitigate them, let's make sure we're not backsliding, we're going back to those previous behaviors. So we'll configure alerts to notify us in real time when those problematic conditions are once again found in the data. This is going to build accountability into our process and ensure on a go-forward basis that we're maintaining compliance, we're meeting SLAs, so on and so forth. Now, included with the monitoring is also a dynamic dashboarding capability for business users, who may or may not want to do some of that deep analysis that I just spoke to. Maybe they're a little bit more comfortable monitoring their process with something they're familiar with like a BI-like dashboard. And so we provide an operational dashboard that they can customize, drill into, and that is going to provide them insight into their own operations and relate specifically to their business function. So with that, let's move into the TimelinePI solution, and we'll take a look at how all this is put into action. So we'll start by uploading our data. And this is key because this is going to allow us to kind of, I'm going to show you as a part of this demo, what it would take to get started with the tool. Okay, and before we start, I'll just kind of define the main thing we're going to be analyzing, and it's a timeline. Now, a timeline is simply just the history of a process instance. Now, this could be a sales order, an invoice, a hospital patient. In the case we're going to be going through today, we're going to be tracking an insurance claim. Okay, now a timeline simply consists of events which say that something happened with this given claim at a specific time. Okay, so for starters, I'll point out to a data file that's got some event-related data for my insurance claims. All right, now this would be coming from an organization's claims management system, really, and really there are just 3 fields which are required in order to get started. The first thing we'll want is a timestamp field. That's going to simply tell us when an event occurred. Next, we're going to need an identifier, a timeline ID. This is going to allow us to join together all of these different events in a given claim into the same context. So in this case, we'd be using probably a claim number or a claim ID. We could also have things like a policy ID or a customer ID. Again, any type of unique identifier which signifies what we're looking to track and measure. Now lastly, the last required field that we'll need is a field that tells us what happened at that step, the event name. So in this example, we'll see things like the first notice of loss was submitted, an adjuster was assigned to the claim, we started our initial review, so on and so forth. So these are quite simply the only 3 required fields. These other fields that you can see here mapped in purple would be our dimensions, right? These additional fields that are going to give more context to the data, allow us to slice and dice, filter, break down the data. And so for this example, we use fields like the adjuster on the claim, the state it was submitted in, the claim priority amount, so on and so forth. Now it's worth mentioning here that these timelines can be assembled from multiple sources, right, corresponding to different systems of record. So different events can come from totally separate systems. As long as they contain this shared object identifier, the tool will be able to connect them together and insert the events from all the myriad of systems into their correct corresponding timelines. Okay. I should say that this is kind of the most simple way of getting data into the tool, pointing out to a file. And I do this just for the sake of showing you an example of how we map data into the tool. But of course, this can be set up to run in an automated fashion so that we're not consistently manually going in here and loading data. So we've mapped some columns in this file. What I would do is simply hit load and allow the tool to begin reconstituting the process based on these events. I'm not going to waste our time doing that. I've already loaded the data for this demo, but if I had, it would have taken about 90 seconds to load what we have here, which is more than 500,000 events related to these claims. Okay, in that time, the tool is going to reconstitute the process, build all the models, create the multiple forms of analysis that we're going to be going through. So once we've successfully got data loaded, automatically we're presented with the overview page, which as you can see includes quite a few metrics which are going to give us a better understanding about our project and this data that we've uploaded. First thing I'll point your attention to here in the middle of the screen, almost 550,000 events we loaded have been mapped into roughly 31,600 timelines. In this case, a timeline is going to be synonymous with a claim. Now we pulled out 31 different types of events from that data. I'll pop that up and give you a look. We got a full list of all the different events that came out of that file. Can sort them by the most commonly occurring events or those associated with the most amount of timelines. And then the only other thing to mention here in full disclosure, other than loading that data and taking that 90 seconds to load the data, the only other thing that I've done prior to this demonstration is assign a couple of icons to be used as opposed to this circle with the number in it. So I'll just show you how that's done. Pretty simple. You can upload your own icons, use ones we provide, simply use coloring for certain events in the process. The idea being just visually when users come into this tool, and you'll see when we get to the timelines view where this becomes more important, it's very, very obvious how things are flowing as a part of these processes, and these icons will help certain events stand out. So we'll pop out of here. Everything else automatically has been done by the tool. Some of the other metrics we've got here. We've got the average duration with the total range of duration of our claims process. So on average, we close out claims within 23 days, but it could range anywhere from 6 hours to 15 months. The number of events in our claim instances, along with the unique count of events, because of course events can be duplicated or done multiple times as a part of a single claim. We've also got the time gap. Now this would be the delta of time in between any two events where essentially no work was occurring as a part of these claims. And you'll see this will become a bit more obvious when we get into the timelines view. You can see where these time gaps are occurring. Now, we've also got the distribution of the first and last events in our claims process. So essentially, which events are most commonly both starting and finishing this claims process. And you can get a look here as to, if I click this last event, the full list of all the events which have finished this claims process, along with kind of a frequency breakdown of how commonly those occur. Right? Again, no questions prior to asking about this process. We're simply just reflecting what the data shows us. All right. So from here, let's take a look at the timelines view. We'll actually look at the process paths which the tool has generated. Now, in the middle, we've got our timelines, and each of the different horizontal lines represents a separate claim instance, and each circle with the icon I mentioned, you can see as an event or a step in that process. All right, now if I scroll to the right, you'll see the length here is actually proportionate to the elapsed time. So some of these, of course, are going to be longer than others. And this includes those time gaps in between events where you can see very clearly where essentially no work is happening as a part of these claims. Now, if I click on any one of these timelines, it's going to give me much more detail as to what's happened with this specific claim, in what order and at what time. All right. Now I'll come back to the sub-process view, but this view is showing me details specific to timeline or claim number X. Right, and this column is the superset of all the events which occurred as a part of this claim. So we've got first notice of loss, an adjuster was assigned, so on and so forth. And you can see the associated time gaps. I've also got my attribute information, if I mouse over, that shows me all the different attributes that I loaded related to this claim. Now if I turn back on these sub-processes, what's happened here is these additional columns to the right, the tool's automatically figured out by analyzing specific patterns in the data which things are most commonly done together or as mutually exclusive steps. So in other words, it's automatically picked out those sub or parallel processes, and you can see those things grouped here together. So I'll give you a quick example. Every claim we would expect should have a first notice of loss event, followed by a coverage confirmation, maybe a fraud check, so on. But not every claim is going to have a personal injury claim associated with it, if these are vehicle claims, right? Or a rental car issued, or total loss with corresponding salvage information. And so the idea here is you can see those broken out and grouped together as sub-processes. Okay. Now if we think about loading up data across multiple systems, right, not just that simple example that I went through in loading one file, we're essentially piecing together the composite life cycle of this claim throughout the entire process, regardless of the system of record that's responsible for recording any given event. All right. Now, this is a good place, I think, to mention this engine, this tool, doesn't know the first thing about insurance or claims processing. Okay, it could just as easily be doing this with invoice, API data, underwriting, sales, healthcare patient tracking. It's totally agnostic to the industry and the use case. The really overarching idea is to give users a much better understanding of what's going on in the business process very, very quickly, regardless of the vertical that we're supporting. So I'll hop out of this view. That's our case detail view. So there's a huge amount of variability in this process, and after having worked with this specific data set, I can tell you there are no two timelines which are chronologically exactly the same. So the first thing that we're logically asked, and I touched on the slide, is there some sort of a way to map that process diagram that's going to give me a general idea of how things are flowing through our business, right? And candidly, it's a question a lot of businesses will struggle to answer with their existing technology set. Okay? So what I'll do is I'll start by initializing a brand new process schema. Okay? And this is going to allow us to map that most common path through the process. And we can first do that by allowing the tool to take what it believes to be the most important milestones. So when I select default milestones, what's happening here is TimelinePI is doing advanced statistical analysis, specifically picking which steps are most reliably and commonly occurring at the same point in the process. So it picked out 9 different milestone events, which most typically happen at the same point in the workflow. That's great, but we can always customize this. I have some others I'd like to assign. Let's include, where the claims are denied, claims are being closed out, estimate prepared, and where we're doing fraud check. Okay, so I've added a few more to this model. Let's have it generate that schema for me. Now this is showing us that most common schema or path based on the milestones that I essentially said that I care about. Okay, now this is not just a Visio diagram. I saved it, and now it becomes a monitoring tool. It actually tells me what number of cases have followed which paths, right? And you can see by the thickness of the line where relatively more claims have gone one path versus another. And you can mouse over and get an idea of the actual transitions, or we can break it down by time. Where is the bulk of our time spent in this process? Right? I changed the metric in the top right. Now we can see, the thicker the line, the longer time is being spent in between any 2 transitions. Right? Is this going to give me a clue as to where maybe bottlenecks are occurring as a part of our process, where there may be candidates for automation, possibly, right? Now, we can even take this schema model a step further and start to better understand where steps that generally don't always occur in a specific point of the process are occurring. So if we think about, in this insurance claims example, a requirement for more information, we need to go back to the customer or third party and retrieve some piece of missing info or trailing document. Really, an event like that could happen at any given point of the process, right? Anywhere after first notice of loss all the way until the claim is being closed out. That variability makes it unreliable to add to this type of a schema. But what we can do is we can start to look at the location of, I'll select my requirement for more information event, and now what you'll see is the percentages in the icon on the line where we're most often having to go back to that customer to request missing information, and possibly in turn elongating our process if they don't get back to us in a timely manner. Okay, so now we have a better idea of generally how claims are going through our workflow. Let's go back and we'll take a look at one of the other we're still in that discovery state here. One of those other process discovery mechanisms that's going to more so highlight the variability in this process. And we'll do that by accessing the path analysis. So this may be put it in a way that is, for some people, is easier to begin analyzing. So anybody with Lean Six Sigma interest, anybody concerned with continuous improvement oftentimes likes this type of view of the data. It's actually a frequency distribution of all of the different process paths with the most commonly followed behaviors here to the left. So we've got all the different events that the tool has mapped out along the left, and then along the top you can see the number of claims along with its percentage to the population which have gone a specific path. So we can clearly see here where steps are skipped, done repeatedly, totally out of order, right? As I scroll to the right, lower and lower claim counts, but some interesting behaviors we have here. But I've got the most commonly followed path here to the left. Now, the tool has suggested these steps that you can see here along the left, but we can, again, make changes to this at any time. So if I'm not interested in analyzing based on when the claim priority was set, that's clerical, and maybe also a setup diary, not really interested in having that. You see as I remove steps or I can add events, everything is going to dynamically recalculate to show me analysis based on this new model that I've set forth. Now, these paths or behaviors here furthest to the left probably shouldn't come as much of a surprise. These are the most commonly followed process behaviors. But if you scroll to the right, we'll see more and more unusual or obscure paths where things are jumping around, skipping steps, doing things repeatedly. And I'll tell you when something stands out, and in this example, these 2 specific behaviors stood out to me right away. This 337 and 311, right, it's only basically 1% each, but what these have exhibited is kind of alarming. We've skipped this coverage confirmation step in both these instances and gone on to complete events further down in the workflow. Now, in an insurance use case, that would be an immediate red flag, right? We should never be not confirming coverage and going on, right? These could be unconfirmed claimants, and that would be a big-time risk to the business, so this should never occur. Now, if I find a red flag like this, what I can do is click on this actual process path or swim lane, apply it as a filter, And now when I come back to my timelines view, you'll see here in the top left, I'm currently looking at those 337 claim instances that exhibited that specific behavior. Okay, and now we're going to start to drill in and start to do some of that analysis to look for root cause, where and why is this occurring, so that I can focus my efforts on making sure that this doesn't happen going forward. All right, so I'll clear this out and we'll move from our discovery phase. Now we'll put our analyst hat on. Okay, so we'll start to ask some questions of this data. Now with the full data set, it's going to be helpful to use the metrics along the top to start to get a better understanding of our claims process, as opposed to scrolling through all 31,000 cases. All right. Now in looking at this duration metric, the fact that there's at least one case which took 15 months to complete stands out to me. Let's dig a bit deeper into this. I click on my duration metric. I'm now presented with the histogram, which shows me the distribution of my cases by their duration. So we see the minimum time to close out a claim is 6 hours, average 23 days, maximum 15 months. Now this spike towards the left shows me that the majority of my claims are done in far less than 15 months. And what I can do is actually adjust this slider, set it at any given threshold, and get a feel for exactly how many claims have been processed in under, in this case, 42 days. And it looks like 94% of our claims have been done in less than 42 days, which is great. But there's still 1,900 plus outliers here. Okay, now we'll come back to this, but I want to show you a way to take this even a step further. And I'll choose to break this histogram down by any one of those different attributes that you saw me load. So if I'm curious if there's an adjuster or a location which is just taking too long to process those claims, I can break this histogram down. So let's do it by looking at our different adjusters. Now when I choose adjuster as my breakdown, now each one of my different respective adjusters has their own histogram relative to the claims they've processed and their book of business. Okay, so now I can start to do comparative analysis and see if there's anything that stands out here. And I'll tell you, within this data set, it's pretty obvious. Jim Ricks, his histogram is quite a bit skewed to the right from what it looks like most other people are. So if you keep your eye on this general average, our general average is 23 days. If I click on Jim Ricks and sub in his histogram, he's 2 months on average longer for him to process claims, which would be obviously a long time. And now I know if I want to have a conversation about driving down this claim closeout time, I can go have a conversation with Jim and figure out exactly what's going on. Is he just getting, the short end of the stick where he's just getting the most complex claims? Does he need training help? Is it procedural? Either way, I know now where I can go to start to focus on driving down this metric. All right, let's close out Jim. We'll go back to our general histogram. I'll set this back to 42 days. As the analyst, right, these are the 1,942 claims that we'd be interested in analyzing. Let's apply this as a filter. Okay, so now again, you can see I'm now looking at those 1942 that span longer than 42 days. All right, now in the interest of time, I want to show you guys just a quick way to get down to a root cause. Okay, so let's break into these long-running claims and see if there's any trends in the data related to these particular claims that are going to show me, again, similar to Jim Ricks, does something stand out here where I can go try to take mitigating action for these? So we'll use our breakdown analysis to do that. So when I bring up our breakdown analysis and we choose to break it down by any of the different dimensions I've got, for example, let's break it down by, is there any kind of thing that stands out by states where these claims are being submitted in? Okay, and a pretty even distribution here. Nothing really stands out, right? There's a high percentage of these long-running claims. Now, if I choose to break it down by a different attribute, by agent, and let's see if there's any agent that stands out that maybe hasn't been pushing. These are actually the people that are responsible for moving these claims along. When I do that, there is somebody that stands out, and it's Carrie Ann McDonough. Now, it's pretty obvious she is responsible for the large chunk, 40% or 751 of those 1,942 claims she's been responsible for. So again, similar to my conversation with Jim, I'm probably going to want to talk with Carrie Ann to figure out exactly what's going on with these claims she's responsible for. Not only that, I can drill a bit further into that. So I can click on Carrie Ann's name, apply her as a filter. Now when I come back to my timelines view, I'm only getting those 751 that she's been responsible for. So if I want to, I can start to get a better feel for exactly what the complexity is with this book of business that she's been dealing with, right? Again, has she been kind of handed a raw deal where she's just getting the most complex claims and that's simply why it's taking so long? Or is there something that stands out to me within this data that tells me why she's not able to process claims as quickly as everyone else? Okay. Now, I've created a couple of filters to be used here, and I just want to go over the concept of saving these. So you can imagine I can build out multiple different filter sets and configurations. If I have the need to come back and reanalyze this exact filter configuration, I don't need to come back into the tool and make all these clicks and set all these filters again. I can simply save this configuration as a new set, so that I can very quickly and easily come back, re-access this filter configuration, and maybe come back next week and see how Carrie Ann is doing. Since the last week, since we've input these changes into the process or helped her out with her claims. Not only that, but we can also use these sets to be able to do side-by-side or cohort analysis. So if I want to compare Carrie Ann's business to the rest of the population or rest of my agent's business, I can visually and quickly go and do comparative analysis using the tool. Right. So for now, I'll clear out these filters and we'll move on to a different form of analysis. That's query or search. Okay, so this is going to be hugely important and very powerful in my mind. A typical business intelligence search that you might be familiar with is going to look for attributes by using, objects by using their current attributes. Now, what if we need to look at things not by a current status, but from more of a historical or a pattern-based perspective? It's kind of the theme of this tool. If we can understand our history, we can fine-tune things going forward. So I'll pose a scenario to you. If somebody were to ask the question, how often do we have rental cars being issued on claims without any record of a coverage confirmation happening, and then subsequently the claim comes back as being denied after we've already incurred the cost of that rental car? Now, it seems like a scenario like that probably shouldn't happen, but by using a BI search, you'd have a really, really difficult, if not probably impossible time answering that specific question. So I'll show you how we can build out that kind of a query. So we'll say we've got an event which is our coverage being confirmed, followed by a rental car being issued on this claim, and then subsequently that claim comes back as being denied. But in this scenario, we missed this coverage confirmation step, so this has not happened, yet we've issued a rental car and the claim comes back as denied. Just quickly, is this happening, right? I click search, I'm going to get a quick response, and I can actually see 91 claim instances have had that specific scenario where we've issued rental cars with no coverage confirmation. Right? Now, the beauty of these queries is that they don't really have to be that trivial. So let's add a bit more to it. I'll add one more event that says, once we sent out that claim denial notice, thankfully the claimant decided to bring back their rental car, so the rental car was returned. But I'm interested in those instances where the claimant decided to take their time before they brought the car back. So let's say the time period in between that denial notice being sent and the rental car being returned, let's look at when it's greater than 4 days, right? Again, driving up the cost to that claim, and you'll see that, so you can bake in time to any of these questions or these queries very, very granularly, whether that's SLA based, process efficiency based. We can build time into all these queries. Not only that, we can look at how many times certain events are happening, or break it down by specific attributes of the data. If I want to do a time period, compare this month versus last month, or a specific adjuster, state, so on and so forth. I can get very, very detailed with these queries. Anyhow, I've made this a bit more complex. We put in that time gap. I go off and click search, and it looks like in 44 of those 91 claims, our claimants decided to wait longer than 4 days before they brought the car back, right, after we sent the denial notice. All right. Now, the ability to go off and explore and test this hypothesis is great. Another aspect of these queries is that you can set them up so they trigger alerts. So I don't need to be sitting and babysitting this data all day long as it's being loaded into the tool. I can configure my alerts and have them fire off when this type of condition is met, making people aware that these cases are occurring. And my alert wouldn't be to this. It would say, if I ever skip this coverage confirmation step and move downstream, I want to be notified. Right? That should never be skipped, and I want to make sure people are held accountable for that type of a thing happening. So I'll clear out these filters and we'll move on to maybe one more type of analysis. As we get into more specialized forms of asking questions, we'll look at our protocol analysis. And a good example of this that I often speak to is in financial services. You're probably familiar when you apply for a mortgage, a consumer loan, you absolutely must get certain disclosures, good faith estimates, and signatures. These things that the government requires are taken into account. Otherwise, you're going to be in violation of federal law. Your loan's going to be null and void, right? These things are mandated. Now, likewise, most processes include areas where when we get to a certain point, there are things that absolutely must happen and oftentimes happen within a given time range. Okay? So in comparison to a query, which says, give me all the cases that match my condition, it's essentially a search. Right? Go off and get me the things that match what I've just set forth. Protocols will allow me to define a set of rules which I feel should always be followed and will show me the timelines which violate that rule. So in other words, it's going to be the inverse of that query in that I'm not concerned if we're following protocols. That's what I expect, right? This series of events occurred all in a timely manner. I'm happy. I want to know when we don't do that. So it's going to be the inverse of that query. So this is a simple salvage protocol that I've created that says when we've there's a series of events that are going to happen, and when a vehicle is confirmed as a total loss, we want to make sure that it's salvaged in a timely manner because each day that it sits on a lot, it's a depreciating asset. So this protocol says after we've prepared the estimate, it's been approved, and now it's a total loss, it should take no longer than 10 days before that vehicle is being salvaged. The longer it's sitting, the more it's depreciating. Again, these are the critical conditions that we expect has been built in our process, and we want to make sure that they're being followed. Now, just like a query, this can be saved and run as an alert and let you know anytime this protocol has been violated. All right. Now, as opposed to only looking at new data being loaded into the system, we can also use these protocols for analysis on our historical data. So if I click Show Violations, this is going to show me all of the different ways that this protocol has been violated along with its root cause. Okay, because they can be violated, and it's not just kind of that it was violated, but how. There's a number of ways that it could have been violated. So we were estimate approve was in the wrong position, we were missing a step, we had a time violation, and so on. Now, if we've got a long list of these violations, and maybe some of them we're not so interested in, some of them may be false positives, we can very easily remove them from view so we can focus on the exact violations that we're concerned with. And then as you've seen me do, if I want to drill into any of the timelines that have exhibited a certain violation, I'd simply apply this as a filter, and we're off and running in uncovering a root cause as to where and why this specific violation was occurring. Okay, it looks like I have just a couple minutes, and I want to touch on one other thing that I alluded to in the slide deck, and that's the dashboards. So I'll give you a quick look at that, and we'll look at our demo dashes. So as a business manager, right, we may not want to be logging into this tool to do deep level analysis. That's what our analysts should probably be doing. But there may be certain company goals, high level initiatives that I want to keep my finger on the pulse of, right? I want to monitor these things. So there's a basic dashboard capability for those users. And this is, as you can see, a little bit less daunting than the timeline view. We're familiar with most people. So the charts on this dashboard are totally interactive and drillable to the extent that I can click on any one of these, select a piece of the pie, and drill into the exact timelines which make up that data set if I have a need to go that far. But I do want to mention that this is not a BI dashboard. As you've seen, it's purely a way of surfacing up information that's directly related to that process kind of analysis that TimelinePI can do and that we've seen thus far. Okay, so each user can very easily go in here and change their layout and create their own unique view of the data, right? And then also build out corresponding alerts if they want to be made aware when things are going awry. So I'll pause there. Mo, I guess I'll throw it back to you if there are questions or other things that that the audience is interested in seeing.
Yes, thank you so much for that presentation, Alex. And yes, we actually do have some questions here, and I'll jump right into it. So the first one here, you showed getting data from a file. Can I set up the system so it updates on a regular schedule as my data changes? And if so, how often?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I'll take that one. So I think I kind of alluded to it, but maybe I wasn't 100% clear. I kind of just showed the most simple and manual way of getting data into the system, and I did that for the sake of just showing how that data was mapped and the required fields and so on. Absolutely, in a production instance, we would not want to be consistently loading up data from a file. We have a set of data management utilities that you can utilize to set up that schedule, and now these utilities sit behind your firewall, right on the customer side, so that they can connect directly into your source systems, or extract the data that you're interested in analyzing as a part of this tool. That way you can review it prior to ever it leaving the customer firewall, and then obviously you can do certain transformations of the data as well. If we need to clean up data, get it into a certain format, we can certainly use the management utilities to do that. Also allows you to set up to run based on a cron job or a schedule, so that you can run at really any kind of interval you'd like. We have customers loading data at 5-minute intervals, so for all intents and purposes, near real time for their business. And so you can it just depends on what makes sense for the data refresh intervals for the data that you're looking to analyze.
Okay, good stuff. So we have another one here, and thank you for sending these questions. Can this tool be used to monitor processes related to mailroom operations or other document capture operations? I think this may be a good one for both Scott and Brooke.
Sure. So I'll take a stab at it, and then Brooke, maybe you can provide some color as well. So the simple answer is, of course. If you think about a document flowing through an organization, it's probably one of the best examples of a process flow. When the document arrives in a mailroom, it's whether it's related to invoice processing, maybe accounts payable, order processing, or any other reason, it typically represents the trigger that starts a process that is going to go on through a series of steps. And so, therefore, of course, we want to be able to measure how quickly we perform each of the steps, monitor them for operational efficiency, make sure we meet any SLA obligations that we might have, or, frankly, to ensure compliance, with particular required steps, either by internal policy or by statute. Brooke, any additional thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think you're correct there, Scott. I think that you usually see that in accounts payable, and certainly in diagnostic imaging departments, where the document is the first trigger of the transaction. And what's important to realize in those triggers is that errors can happen there, where you either put the wrong claim number or the wrong health card number that triggers an inefficient process downstream. So that's the value of looking at this tool set against your capture process, is capturing those triggers and transactions very early on instead of waiting for it to come downstream.
Okay, thank you both. We have a few more here. Is there an API, or do you have connectors to the database?
Alex, maybe you want to take
it? Yeah. So I think I may have touched on that. So those data management utilities will give you the ability to connect directly into any kind of relational database that you've got and be able to extract the data that we're interested in analyzing. So the data management utilities would be those that extract, transform, and load tool that you would use to connect into those source systems. And then you mentioned APIs. Maybe I will just touch on this. We do have a couple of out-of-the-box cloud-to-cloud connectors built for certain tools like ServiceNow and Salesforce. So for those types of solutions, there's no need for you to really configure any kind of data transaction or data pull. We're able to actually build a direct connection into your instances database and pull that data in based on a schedule. So multiple different kind of ways of doing it. It really just depends on what system you're looking to connect to.
Okay, thank you much. I think we have time for one or two more. We're doing both BPM and RPA projects. Where does this fit with those products?
This is Scott. I'll take that one. So particularly around BPM and even more so these days around RPA, or robotic process automation, for those who aren't familiar with the acronym soup here. RPA is becoming one of the most popular use cases for teams that use our product. I mean, if you think about it, it makes sense, right? Because if you don't understand how things currently work, how can you possibly know how you're going to improve them? And by the way, how could you automate them, right? You have to know how it works in the manual sense to even begin to imagine how you're going to, try to put that into an automated form. And the other thing is just generally on any kind of process reengineering or process improvement, process excellence type initiative that any organization has, they start from a good amount of research that historically has been very manual, right? So that people had to go through and do time and motion studies, and if you're kind of the Lean or Six Sigma ilk, right, the Gemba walks and the Kaizen processes and all of the things popular within those methodologies, you've got to understand where the bottlenecks occur. You have to understand what types of exceptions need to be planned for, and where steps can be consistently executed, so therefore maybe good candidates for automation, and other cases where frankly there's just too much variability and dependence on human oversight to consider doing a fully automated process. So yes, it does fit with those products, and I think just from a timing standpoint, I would say it exists in two sort of major time frames around those projects, certainly on the front side as part of the planning and definition side of the project, so kind of the pre-analysis. And then secondly, once those solutions are deployed, whether based on BPM or RPA, there's a desire to still want to go and monitor how effective those re-engineered processes are, or automated processes are. And one thing we can't take for granted, and I'll tell you, it's one of the drivers for why we created TimelinePI, is while Alex focused a lot on the analysis side, we also recognize that there's a deficit with some of these capabilities in these products of being able to actually monitor after the solutions are deployed. So using TimelinePI as a monitoring tool is also very valuable.
Okay, thank you. We're going to squeeze in one more question. I believe Alex already partially answered this one. Is the TimelinePI tool, capable of analyzing data from systems like ServiceNow or Salesforce?
Yeah, so I think I did touch on that. We actually have those cloud-to-cloud connectors built in that I mentioned that allow you to connect directly from TimelinePI into ServiceNow and Salesforce, bring in, whether you're using it for support ticketing or tracking the sales process, we can automatically kind of load that data based on a schedule, and there's really no need for any manual intervention whatsoever. So that's a direct connection.
Alex, maybe you want to comment a little more on, obviously those products are great products, and they've got their own reporting and analytics capabilities, but maybe what I've been able to identify, for instance, even just in the ServiceNow example, of how we can give a perspective on tying together their different objects in a way that they can't even do internally.
Yeah, absolutely. So it really is interesting in that ServiceNow has a lot of great analysis tools, but they don't really give you the ability to tie together all of the different tasks, problem areas from a given incident all into one singular view. And so, as you've seen in the timeline demo in the TimelinePI demo, we have the ability then to capture all those different related artifacts from a ServiceNow incident and tie them in together into a single timeline view, so we can see when concurrent tasks are occurring, which tasks are taking too long. Maybe we want to break it down by business unit. And so, seeing that full incident journey is something that right now that ServiceNow can't give you, but we can give you that via a direct connection into your ServiceNow instance, and allow you to kind of get a new level of analysis for that type of a use case.
Okay, thank you so much. We are at the top of the hour now, so I'd like to thank you all for joining our webinar today, and many thanks to our presenters for delivering a very informative presentation. We will be following up with a recording of the webinar in case you'd like to revisit or share with a colleague, so be on the lookout for that. Thanks again, everyone, and have a wonderful day.